Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today, our Ukrainian show. My name is Sasha Star. We have Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. He doesn't need any representation. His fantastic books speak for themselves. And
First, a word from our sponsor.
also, we will be happy to have Mark Lee, our producer, on the show, and founder of the network, Nick Paliveda. Welcome to the show, Nick.
I'm here.
Right there. Okay. Excellent.
Party can start.
Jonathan, from the title of your book, you are the first one to explain why ever Putin invaded Ukraine.
Well, and it's interesting because the book itself, which I published back as a second edition, of what was originally my PhD dissertation, which I published back in 1980. This particular second edition book is in 1993, but its predictions and its logic and its explanation of how the Russians view our strategy and why they act the way they do explains perfectly well why Vladimir Putin has been acting the way he does towards Ukraine.
Please tell us.
Say again?
Please tell us.
Yes. The reason he has been acting the way he does towards Ukraine is he believes that his nuclear arsenal, which the Russians have stated before, is the only reason they are considered a great power, according to Boris Yeltsin in a speech back in 1994. They believe that their nuclear arsenal gives them leverage, political leverage, forcing the United States and the West to react to their actions. It gave him, from their perception, cover. It gave them leverage and freedom of action to use their own military power, conventional especially, in ways supportive of their foreign policy goals. So, when true to this perception, remember back in 2014, when Russia annexed the Crimea, and the West did not react forcibly, Putin drew the natural conclusion from their perspective that it was their nuclear arsenal that was giving them the freedom of action and leverage to pursue their foreign policy goals.
Jonathan, a quick question.
Go ahead.
A quick question. Yes. That you relied on Yeltsin's speech in 1994. So, however, before Putin, in 6 years, 1994 to 2000, Yeltsin never ventured into onslaught or Ukraine or the Baltic states or anybody else. Okay, he kept status quo. And only Putin, and not even right away, but later on, starting with his Munich speech in 2007, that's the only time when we started to feel that there is something more to just a nice face and a KGB biography or so on. There's much more dangerous situation. How do you explain that?
I explain that because even during the Cold War, when the Soviet Union at one point in 1979 had attained what I would call the marginal numerical superiority in nuclear weapons, and they were at the height of their perceived superiority over the United States. Only then, during that time, they had been very gradually increasing the scale of and kind of use of their military power. It reached its zenith in 1979 when they invaded Afghanistan, because that was the first time the Soviets used their military power in an area outside of their heretofore recognized Eastern European sphere of influence. They have never made any sudden leaps or sudden escalations of their use of military power. It has always been very gradual and very cautious. And even with in Yeltsin's declaration in 1994 to the Russian Duma was it was more of a defensive declaration than anything else. He was basically showing how fragile Russia's claim to great power status is that it rested solely on the fact that Russia's armed forces had nuclear weapons. And it was not a great, tacitly admitting that it was not a great power in any other respect. So this is a very fragile thing that the Russians have, their grasp on great power status. And that is why, as I stated previously, that the one thing that the Russians fear more than anything else, even though they don't want to publicly admit it, is they fear the potential of Western technology, U.S. and Western technology, to neutralize the one thing that makes Russia a great power in their own perception, their nuclear missile arsenal.
Hey, Johnson, along those same lines.
Yeah, go ahead.
Johnson, along those same lines, because we were just talking about it on the news report earlier today, the World Edition and everything. I know that there has been some efforts to move some nuclear weapons into Belarus, tactical nuclear weapons and everything along those lines. So does the U.S. and the West need to be concerned about that? I know some of the past shows you have talked about the space fleet and how that could definitely effectively neutralize any nuclear attacks, but some people would say that sounds very
in the long run. Yes, in the long run, in the overall perception in the long run, the upgrading of the Space Force with a space fleet would complete a global system of interlocking shields, which would ineffectively neutralize the nuclear arsenals of our opponents. In the meantime, however, the success of the Patriot system in the theater thus far is very indicative. It's very important because it foreshadows the potential success of a global ballistic missile defense system. Patriot has come a long way from when it was first deployed in 1991 in Operation Desert Storm. It was not 100% effective by that point. In fact, it could barely, at that point, deflect incoming Scud missiles from their targets. It could not achieve true destruction of a bomb. But Raytheon has been product improving the Patriot ever since then. And it is the current effectiveness of the system has become readily apparent to all observers, which is why its existence and deployment in Ukraine is so important, and it will be even more important in a post-war period once the eastern flank of NATO is fully equipped with effective ballistic missile defense systems such as Patriot and possibly also the Iron Dome and other systems which would complete a ballistic missile defense shield against any future attempts at coercion or attack by Russia. So but to answer your original question, why is my book, The Russian View of U.S. Strategy, so important? Even though it was published back in the mid-90s, because it predicts and successfully predicts the reaction and the true motivation behind Russia's military actions. And it provides an important clue as to the most effective national strategy that the U.S. can adopt in order to deter and defeat future Russian aggression.
You just mentioned that you predicted that in mid-90s in your book. So what is the reason that you predicted that Russia will sooner or later attack Ukraine or any other nations? Why did you predict it in the mid-90s?
The reason I predicted it in the mid-90s is because my original previous research looked at looking at the Russian view of U.S. strategic doctrines all throughout the Cold War period, and particularly when President Reagan declared the Strategic Defense Initiative back in 1983. The Russian reaction to that was amazing. In general, they were very fearful and alarmed by SDI in general because they claimed it was a step for the U.S. to adopt a true nuclear warfighting strategy. But even more important was their reaction to Patriot. They have been terrified of Patriot ever since, it's in print since 1985. In 85, my brigade commander, when I was with their intelligence officer in Darmstadt in 1985, he said, "Hey, Captain Lockwood, you read those Russian military journals. See if you can find anything in there about what the Russians are saying about Patriot." This was January 1985. Well, I checked my journals, and sure enough, to my good fortune, in the January 1985 issue of Vestnik Protopostushnoy Oborony, Herald of Anti-Aircraft Defense, there was an article there in the back of the journal on medium to high altitude air defense systems. And the last third of the article dealt with Patriot. The amazing thing about that article is that the author used the acronym to describe Patriot, PRO, Protovoroketnoy Obrony, anti-missile defense. He said that claimed that Patriot was to be employed for the strategic defense of important targets in the United States. This is important because the U.S. wasn't saying anything of the sort at the time. And they were saying effectively that essentially what the Russians were claiming is that Patriot was and is the leading edge of SDI, of Star Wars, the first manifestation of the Star Wars idea put into practice. We never said that. As a matter of fact, it was not until 1987, here's the amazing thing, 1987 that the Patriot first demonstrated that it could intercept a ballistic missile when it successfully did so in a test in Europe. So how would the Russians have concluded that the Patriot was the leading edge of Star Wars? Here's why. What company developed the old Safeguard anti-ballistic missile system back in 1970? Raytheon. They developed the Safeguard system, and it included phased array radar. Well, who developed the Patriot system? Raytheon. What does it include? Phased array radar. So, and yet was all in the open press. So any Russian observer looking at U.S. open sources could easily conclude, aha, Patriot has an ABM capability because it's got phased array radar. So they would have been able to conclude it. However, their fear of U.S. technological potential caused them to erroneously conclude that Patriot was the leading edge of Star Wars because they all wanted to make sense of it and make it all seem as part of a coherent strategy. So here you go. You've got the Russian fear of Patriot and its potential, which has now been demonstrated. Their fear goes all the way back to the mid-1980s. And I incorporated that into my research and into the future course of Russian and U.S. strategy. And I predicted back then that the Russians would play to strength. They would focus on nuclear weapons and the exploitation of space. They are doing both. They are doing the nuclear.
I wanted to ask you, you're familiar with article published about a few days ago by Thomas Friedman that the Putin is the biggest fool of all Russian leaders. And in that article, he shows that Putin, forget about attack against Ukraine, but what it led to, that he destroyed complete market for Russian oil and gas products in Europe, at least. He's make a joke of Russian-produced military equipment, which was a big seller for all these years. So right now, with what's happening in Ukraine, who is going to buy Russian military equipment and ammunition? It's on the other hand, it's a Patriot that there will be 10 years line, a wait line to get people the Patriot missiles. By the way,
they aren't going to be able to make them fast enough.
Yeah, Jonathan,
just finish, Mark.
Jonathan and Sasha, real quick question. Something that I've been hearing about, and I was wondering y'all's thoughts, because you've alluded to it, and I think even Ivan, when he is here, has been alluding to it as well. But there are dissident groups even within Russia that apparently are gaining a lot of traction. They are fighting at Bryansk and they're fighting at Belgorod, and they are definitely being very vocal and everything. So if this is a collection of anti-Kremlin forces that are even within Russia, and they apparently come from different views and different ideologies and everything, when Putin is eliminated, and there is no doubt that he will be eliminated at some point or another, what kind of vacuum is this going to create? Because it does seem like Russia has got its own internal problems as well, not just the war that they are launching against Ukraine, but also the stuff that is going on within their country as well. So you're a expert in that area, Jonathan, and I know that you have definitely lived there, Sasha. So that's something that I think a lot of people around the world are concerned about, is there's this big, massive country that is possibly about to disintegrate into all kinds of internal conflicts that could have some world repercussions as well. But what are y'all's thoughts around that?
Well, for one thing, it simply reinforces the need for, in a post-war environment, for the United States and the West to emphasize a new version, an updated version of the strategy of containment, which worked so well during the Cold War itself. We do not want to threaten Russia's existence. As a matter of fact, Napoleon once counseled, never interfere with an enemy who is in the process of destroying himself. You don't want to intervene in Russian internal politics or any kind of internal disarray that's going on, particularly if they still are in possession of a nuclear missile arsenal. The safest thing you can do at that point is simply to reinforce your own defenses, not for offensive strikes, but simply to improve your shield. Build up your shield, your ballistic missile defense shield, to contain any potential lashing out. Because in my observations and readings of Russian articles when I was doing my dissertation research, the Russians frequently spoke of something they referred to as the crisis of capitalism. They believed, according to them, that as the socialist revolution continued to gain successes throughout the world, eventually the U.S. capitalists would become so desperate to stop this worldwide revolution, they would lash out with a global nuclear war in a desperate attempt to reverse the situation. This is a projection of what they themselves would be tempted to do were they to find themselves in a similar situation. This is why, if you have a Russia that is undergoing disintegration and possible dissolution, the last thing you want to do is step in there and interpose yourself and make yourself a target. What you want to do at that point is you want to be as conciliatory as possible, but at the same time, build up your ballistic missile defense shield. Contain Russia. And in the words of the original author, George Kennan, of the containment doctrine, eventually Russia will disintegrate, collapse under the weight of its own internal contradictions.
Jonathan,
Yes,
all the defense mechanisms, the Patriot and the ABM system sounds really good. But here's the problem, and anybody on the internet can go see it. During the 60s, Russia developed this huge bomb called Tsar Bomba, and you can watch it on the internet. Only go to YouTube, TSAR Bomba, and it blows up. And Jonathan, this is very impressive. So here's the problem. Let's imagine the United States is able to stop 99% of the missiles that carry nuclear warheads to the United States, but one happens to get through, and it's Tsar Bomba. What happens to the place that Tsar Bomba lands on?
Nick, I don't think that Russia has a carrier that can, in fact,
it's
deliver.
the largest weapon that they were able to carry. The Tsar Bomba, they did that just to show that they could explode a bomb. That doesn't mean they can get it to. And keep in mind also, when you have a ballistic missile defense system up there, when you have a ballistic missile defense system in place that's close to effective as the Patriot, you introduce a very big strategic problem into the calculus of Russian planners. If they are to launch a nuclear missile attack against the United States with a ballistic missile defense shield in place, they do not know how many of their missiles will get through. They do not know which ones will get through. What they do know, if they don't have a comparable shield in place themselves, they will be devastated. Ours will get through, and we will devastate the living daylights out of them.
Well, isn't that also the reason for Putin's paranoia, Jonathan, is this? Okay, it's not just the United States nuclear capacity, which is huge over here, but frankly, the ability to stage not even nuclear, but just traditional weapons in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Finland now, Poland, etc. And so, frankly, if you look at it from a strategic standpoint, Russia doesn't have a prayer. In other words, if it's
they cannot project power in the way that the United States can.
Yeah, because the thing is, the fact is, we can annihilate them, and it's very questionable whether they can annihilate us.
Hey, Jonathan and Nick, really quickly. Jonathan and Nick, really quickly, because we mentioned this on the news earlier today as well in the World Edition and everything. But one of the things that I am wondering about, because I hear what you're saying about the nature of American military might versus the Russian military might. But this show is called Ukraine, Russia, China, and apparently China has got their hands in a way of being able to hack into our military system. They've hacked into our Navy. So is there any danger that they could hack into our Navy, and while we might have the better missiles, be able to fire them in opposite directions or do whatever else they want to, and all in that space? Because I do know that for the common man, that is a concern. They're going like, well, the Chinese can hack into us. Well, maybe the Russians can hack into us, and who knows which way they may make the missiles go, and all in that space. So is this raised, because you're in that security space, Jonathan, has that raised any concerns in your mind when we just recently had this attack recently, and that is one of the major branches, the Navy?
It raises a concern, but it's not a paralyzing fear. I mean, we have been aware of this threat for quite some time, and we are taking measures to address it. It's as simple as that. It's an ongoing concern, but it is not a reason for us to be so totally paralyzed with fear about what the other side might be able to do. Is we focus on, okay, what can they do? And what can we do in the meantime to counteract that? It is an ongoing struggle. And if it introduces uncertainty into our minds, it certainly introduces uncertainty into their minds. They are by no means 100% confident that they can do what they think they ought to be able to do.
What the situation allows China is to get a seat at the international table, especially after their success with Saudi Arabia and Iran on the other hand, and some other diplomatic overtures, so to say. So now they are trying to insert themselves into a possible peace deal between Ukraine and Russia. So if they would be successful, which I don't think so, but still, they would show to all world that what United States and Western Europe and nobody else in the world could do it, China could. So therefore, they're setting their special envoy to Ukraine and to Russia and back to Ukraine. And what they don't realize, same as our tomorrow's birthday boy, Henry Kissinger's 100 years.
Ooh, that's impressive. I don't
That's
care where. That's
impressive.
impressive.
It is, yeah. He doesn't have to do anything else. He's done it by all his previous life. However, it's not enough for a great man. He wants to do something else. Now, it's, in my opinion, it's a futile attempt to bring to peace at this time Russia and Ukraine, because with Russian atrocities, if it wouldn't be for that, like Bucha and other cities, the peace would have been achieved approximately a month after invasion started. They could do it at that time. But with all the Russian atrocities right now, and with all the slow but impactful and finally in its full stride West's help to Ukraine, this peace now is, in my opinion, next to impossible. Jonathan, what's your opinion?
Yeah, I'm not. As far as China's ability to make peace between Russia and Ukraine, I am just totally skeptical of that. I mean, I think it's a great deal of posturing on China's part. They don't have in order to be able to broker a peace between two nations with politically irreconcilable objectives. Now, I don't think China fully understands just how irreconcilable the political goals of Russia and Ukraine are. And for them to try to portray themselves as a nation do this would mean that they essentially are more powerful than Russia and Ukraine and conceivably the United States put together. So I think it betrays a certain degree of arrogance on the part of the Chinese to think that they could portray themselves as peacemakers, particularly given their track record of the past few decades. Peacemakers they are not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but see, China may want to assert themselves in the world stage, but also look at another thing. What does China have to lose if Russia and Ukraine keep going at each other? What's their big loss? They don't really have a dog in the hunt. I mean, or a dog in the race or a horse in the race. They have no issues why Russia and China go at each other, except they do like to import Russian oil, and they would not compromise on the fact they like cheap Russian oil. But other than that, what does China care if these two people want to go gouge each other's eyes out? I mean, they could care less, except to give them more prestige on the international front if they were able to broker a peace. But I don't see where it's going to be brokered anytime soon. Right now. No, I mean, the thing is, the real problem you have.
They need, and the Chinese don't have the ability to, like the Russians. They face a similar problem that the Russians do, which the United States and the West does not have. The Chinese cannot project power. They cannot realistically project power in order to be able to enforce a peace.
You have a real problem with the eastern part of the Ukraine. I believe Ukraine wants that land back. And I also believe that once they get enough Western tools, they will get it back, because Russia can't compete, Sasha. They really, look, our budget is 10 times greater in defense than Russia. We spend zillions of dollars. They don't have the money. They don't have the might. They just, frankly, they just can't, as I say, they just can't get it done. And so as soon as those weapons arrive, and they will arrive between now and the end of the year, all the Eastern Front's going to be taken over by Ukraine, and Russia's going to be sitting back at their borders. And then Zelensky said, "Okay, now we'll talk peace." And I think that's honestly that's what's going to happen. The Russian military might was basically siphoned off by their wonderful oligarchs. There's no military.
I think
they've already proven that.
This war now puts US is absolutely incredible situation where it spends approximately 5% of its Pentagon's military budget.
Sure.
No US soldier participates or being killed in this war, period. So the efficiency of United States in this affair is unheard of. It's never happened in Vietnam or in Afghanistan or in Iraq or just anywhere else in the world. Situation where no American being killed, and it uses only 5%.
Right.
Pentagon budget. I don't know what's Pentagon doing with another 95%.
Sure. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
But there's a 5%. It's great.
We could spend 10% of our budget, and that would equal the entire budget of Russia.
Absolutely.
And we still have 90% left over.
So it wouldn't be for 5%, but it would be 10% of military budget. Russia would be gone. It would be
Sasha.
Okay, guys, switch to decaf.
Let's put it this way.
Switch to
I hate
decaf.
I hate to tell Putin this, so I didn't tell Putin this. He is going to lose this. If I was his attorney advising him, he is going to lose this and lose it big time. Well, it's just like Hitler goes, oh, well, in Japan, we'll get the United States involved. If you ever saw the movie Patton, I know, John, you have, right? Have you seen Patton? America loves the war. They love the
Americans love a winner and will not tolerate a loser.
America, when it comes to war, is nutty. Okay, so the thing is, Putin is going to lose. What he needs to do is figure out how he's going to be able to lose without getting himself in some trash can like the head of Libya, or hung like the guy in Baghdad. Seriously, he's going to lose. If I was a trainer, you're going to lose. The only question is when and how. So you better learn very quickly how you're going to establish this, because you're going to have your butt handed to you. It's just a matter of time. And Sasha, it'll be before the end of the year. This war will be over.
I like the story about a customer in the seafood restaurants orders a lobster. So the waiter is bringing the lobster, and there is only one claw. So he's asking the waiter, where is the second claw? He said, you know what, there was a big fight, and he lost his claw. Oh, why didn't you bring me the winner? That's about American Slavic winners.
Yeah. And the thing is, our technology is better. There's nothing that what can he do except bring some poor pigeons that work on farms into the battlefield just to get slaughtered by our technology? It's kind of almost an unfair fight, because the Ukrainians are actually pretty smart. They know how to use the technology. They love technology. They were great in developing actually the drones when I was working with them years ago. The Russians aren't. They're farmers, they're peasants, and they're going to put peasants. Come on, John. It's not even fair. You put peasants on the line with tech companies. Forget it.
The Ukrainians share something very important in common with Americans, in that Americans have been historically famous for being in love with gadgetry, technology.
Yeah, right.
Gadgets.
That's
Americans
true.
will always look for gadgets in our history. We've always been looking for that, and the Ukrainians are like Americans in that sense. They are also they're excellent at improvising and being able to grasp new technology and new ideas and imaginatively use them. According to the reports, the Ukrainians figured out a way to use Patriot in ways that the Americans had not anticipated.
Right.
Which is great.
And if they ever saw, okay, I know we left Afghanistan, which I think was a mistake, but if they ever saw how we operate in Afghanistan, hardly any Americans were killed, and it was all done electronically over here. You could actually, because we could zero in and just pick off people through our drones, it was just horrible. How bad we could just kill out all the Taliban. So what Putin's going to come to realize by the way, Sasha, between now and the end of the year, how poor of a position he really has. I know he plays chess, but I don't think he's that good. He's never seen a poor position.
Your brother Carl would eat him for lunch.
I know that. I think he has I think he needs some Russian chess players to go, Vladimir Putin, your position is very poor. You better offer draw now. You might get one. Otherwise, you'll be hanging by this, like the guy in Iraq did, or in a tunnel like the guy in Libya. Your life will not be very good.
I'd like to finish our program with the fact that Russian Chess Federation at one time was the mightiest chess federation in the whole world. Now they denounce their participation in European organization, which is European Chess Association, and joined Asian Chess Association. So they're now completely want to switch to Asian ecosystem instead of European, which is a huge disaster because obviously through its history, Russia was always aligned much more with the West than East.
True.
The East, which is China, Mongols, is completely foreign bodies to Russian people. However, I might be mistaken. Okay, guys. By the way, Nick, you were not right about the technology. Russian love technology. There's only different kind of technology. They're like dishwasher machines. Their wives tell them on cell phones to their husband in Ukraine, don't forget to bring dishwasher machine.
I'll send him some dishwashing soap.
Okay,
Okay, guys. Thank you so much for the show, and we'll see you again on Tuesday. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Ow.